Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Shark Tank, the podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Ben Torah in the workforce. There are a lot of apps out there that you could download to learn Torah on your phone. Many of these apps are built by big organizations with big budgets. Did you know that the world's largest Torah app was built by a balabas from Fairlawn in his spare time? Today, we sit down with Josh Herzberg, programmer at Google and the founder of the Torah app. We talked about the software industry, what it's like to work in Google, and how he built this really incredible app. Before we jump in, a quick reminder that if you enjoy Shark Tank, the best way to show your support is by leaving a 5-star review, hitting subscribe, and sharing this episode with a few friends. My name is Yaakov Wolf, and this is Shark Tank. Josh Herzberg, welcome to Shark Tank. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Maybe let's start with just a little bit of background. Where are you from? What yeshiva did you go to? And where are you living now?
Sure. So I'm from the Five Towns. I went to Rambam High School, and I ended up going to Yura Gush, went to Cooper Union, and spent time. Then I went into software, spent time at Bloomberg, now working at Google, and now I live in Bergen County in Fairlawn.
And how did you decide to go into the software industry?
So I was in Cooper Union. I think I was always kind of good at math and science. So I went to Cooper. They have a good engineering program there. I did electrical engineering. And I think kind of while I was there, I kind of, I guess really liked software. I thought it was kind of a good industry to go into. I think as kind of a Torah Jew, I think it's a good place to be in. First of all, just like it's, there's flexibility. There are a lot of job offers out there. There's a lot of opportunities. The last few years has been a little bit more limiting in terms of the job opportunities, but overall it's been, it's a very good industry, I think, to be in. And, if anyone's considering Aliyah, which I think, kind of from Jews, should at least try to be considering that. I think it's a good industry, to be able to move over compared to, medicine or law, where, you're more limited in where you would work or your hours or kind of other things. The high tech industry in Israel is always strong. So overall, I thought it was, it was definitely a good market, and I definitely recommend it for people who are kind of naturally inclined towards that.
So there's a lot there that I want to actually follow up on, but you said that you studied electrical engineering and now you're at Google. So are you using that training or you shifted?
It's not really a shift. At Cooper, at the time that I was there, they didn't have a computer science major. What they had was electrical engineering, and I focused in computer engineering. So I was kind of on it was a pretty smooth path. That was kind of a standard path. And people who were in Cooper who ended up going into software, that was kind of the degree that people took. There's, some people who did like mechanical engineering and ended up going into software. That would be a more atypical path, but definitely I was kind of in the standard type of path for going into software, which is, kind of, I had computer engineering, and I definitely take a lot of, data structures and computer related courses and whatnot.
And I want to get into a little more specifics about Google, but before we do that, just broadly about the software industry, the tech industry, you mentioned some of the cultural lifestyle facets of that decision that you made and how you recommended for Torah Jews. Can you talk about that a little more, about how the tech industry is conducive to living life as a Ben Torah?
Sure. So, I mean, I think the software industry, there's a lot of job opportunities out there. I think, the world has kind of seen the value of kind of being able to automate things and kind of, leverage the scalability of software. Obviously the world we live in, it's become abundantly obvious over the last decade or so, right? But there's, you can go to LinkedIn or whatever, and, there's hundreds of thousands of startups or big companies that are looking for software engineers, and there's kind of this sea of options, and obviously there are different quality options out there, right? But there's really a ton of options. Again, like I mentioned, I think we're having kind of the biggest hurt to the tech industry since the .com bubble, but I still think it's a very strong industry, and with ChatGPT or LLMs, large language models, I think we're going to see more kind of more, money and more kind of investment put into this space. And, I think it's a strong industry. It's also a type of industry that by its nature, has I would say by its culture has a lot of flexibility. Kind of it has kind of this Bay Area culture of kind of, wearing flip-flops and the t-shirt, as opposed to like kind of the New York finance industry where you're kind of, wearing a suit. Part of that I think is also that I think part of that's just historical. Part of it I think is also because when you build something and because it's so scalable, having one good innovative idea could be worth $1 billion. And some ways just letting people be free to innovate and kind of explore things is more important and more valuable than like having a rigid definition of they need to accomplish this task by this time. I think in some ways, giving people the freedom to tinker with things and explore, in some ways ultimately leads to more success because it kind of brings out creativity and because the way the software world works is just like once you build it and you could scale it to these ginormously successful products, it's kind of a very valuable for the software industry that it creates that.
I've always been fascinated by this topic of different industries, different companies and their culture and how conducive they are to a work-life balance. And so you mentioned two things, you acknowledged two things. One was the cultural aspect, and the other is just inherently the type of work that's being done. And I'm wondering if I understood correctly, anything that's creative is more about getting the right ideas versus like hustling and doing long hours, right?
I'm not sure it's necessarily directly related to whether or not it's creative or not. I can imagine, if you're designing something or some artistic work, it's very creative. It doesn't necessarily scale as much, right? So it's not just because someone's creative doesn't necessarily mean that once you build it once, it's worth, hundreds of millions of dollars. I think the tech industry more lends itself. It's creative, but also has this way of, you're not like a Costco, a company that's selling product. You're sometimes you are Amazon selling product, but it's the tech industry is on this type of thing where you're basically making computers do the work for you. And if you could just figure out what type of thing you should build that makes the computers do it, it's able to scale extremely, extremely well. So I think that lends itself more so. But that's just, one little, lens of viewing it. I think that's not really the full picture, but that's one interesting, I think, lens of viewing it of why I think that the tech industry has that type of culture.
And as far as Google in particular, it has a reputation as being one of the best places to work out there. Is it all that it's cracked up to be?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the best place, but honestly, I think it's a really great place to work. They have definitely a culture of, first of all, it pays well. It has a good work-life balance. It has this culture of kind of this the freedom of kind of being able to innovate and encouraging people to work on the things they want to work on. And it's an empowering place. They have a nice campus. They have good food. It's a good place to work. It really is a great place to work. I'm really blessed to have that opportunity.
And I'm sure that a place like Google probably invests in making sure that their employees have the right conditions to do work which is focused, productive, creative, that their employees are happy and fulfilled in their work. Anything you can share with us about how that works?
Yeah, I mean, I think for example, like, I kind of mentioned that, they have a really nice campus. If you're in the Bay Area, campus. If you're in New York, they have a nice building, right? Nice, but it's a really cool building. It's a really nice building. They have these couches that are places where there's lots of different places to work, right? You're not kind of just you don't have to be just sitting in a cubicle where it's like your same, almost you could kind of sit somewhere else and be at different places, and they have, free food, on campus, right? And or in the building, right? And on some levels, you're like, well, this is just a benefit they're giving the employees. So it's just like, okay, you're able to incentivize, smart people to come work for you. I think on one level, it is that. But honestly, I think it's more than that, right? I think if you, if that same employee were to spend an hour going out to lunch and, getting lunch down the block in the city and then having to come back, that hour wasted, quote unquote wasted, is worth more to the company than, paying $15 for the meal, right? I'd rather have those same employees all hang out for lunch and they're all talking to each other. And kind of, like I said, they might be just talking about, the weather or whatever, but also like they're sitting and talking, and who knows what ideas or what, first of all, that's just, culture building, but also just like, who knows what ideas come out of those conversations. So like they're sitting there having their free lunch and, on one level, it's like, yeah, the employees are happy that they're getting their free lunch, but also like those same people are now talking and chatting and having a fun culture instead of going off and spending that same hour and going into to get lunch down the block. And I think another thing is like because they have this fun place, right? It's like, okay, like if you're married with kids, maybe you're gonna head home, when it's time to go home. But if you're not married, you're a single guy, you're kind of building these fun tech products, right? Like you stick around, there's a game room in the office, whatever, you hang around, and then 6 p.m. comes, you get your free dinner, and then maybe you go back to coding, right? It actually just creates this culture where like you kind of want to be there, right? And it creates a space where people want to contribute back and are want to be in the office. So I think it works out well. Obviously,
And
it has
do
worked
you
out
have
well.
anything else to share with us about the process of coming up with creative and good ideas besides for the social aspect, which I think is very important and should be emphasized, but are there any other things that you can share? Because everyone's trying to come up with good ideas, to think clearly, to focus, to come up with, good strategies and good projects that they're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think Google's a very successful company for a good reason. Now, one of it is just they were in the right place, the right time, the right idea, the right time. But they're also a well-run company, right? It's a ginormous company. It's whatever it is, 180,000 employees or something. It's hard to comprehend, right? Twice the size, or not quite, but twice the size of Lakewood, right? It's hard to comprehend how massive a company like that is and the scale that they work at. But they have bureaucracy because you have to at that scale. But it's extremely well organized bureaucracy, and it's well organized things. They're very data driven, right? When they're releasing new features, right? Facebook, the big tech companies all do this kind of thing. You're releasing new features. You're making sure that the thing you're releasing is positive, not negative, right? And you have the metrics in order, to prove or to kind of guide you on whether or not something makes sense or not, right? It's these big tech companies are so successful by accident. They're successful because they're well organized. They're companies that know how to be productive, right? So on one level, it's you could say, oh, innovation, this like kind of idea of like, oh, being creative anywhere, and kind of you think of colors flying all over the place. Some of it is just like well organized, doing things in a well organized way that like you're slowly moving the bar in the right direction, right? It's supposed to like kind of randomly making decisions and not knowing if it's better or worse, right? There's many decisions you make and it's like, oh, well, this is actually worse. Okay, we'll roll it back and we'll try something else, right? And if you do enough of those, well, if you make sure that when you're doing something and it's a positive improvement, right? I've reduced the time for the search to complete by X percentage, then this is one that I'll release that feature. If this thing ended up, making it an extra 200 milliseconds slower, then okay, let's roll that back. We don't need that, right? So it's an extremely well-run organization. I think it's definitely a good type of mindset to have of being of being effective.
I want to move on to, I guess, the core of our conversation today, which is really your efforts to take the skills you've learned in the tech world and apply them to the Torah world. So maybe you could start with like the early days. What was the first project or the first idea that you had to take some of the software skills and to apply them to Torah?
Yeah, so I think I was always interested in kind of the Torah tech space, or I guess since I've been involved in tech. So I guess while I was in college, I started being involved in that. I think I first saw Sefaria, and I worked on little like scripts or whatever to help like upload content to Sefaria back when they were kind of much smaller. I also had like these summaries that I created, these Torah summaries that I created that like I summarized, parts of Shas that I was going through. I was doing Daf Yomi at the time, and I had my summaries of Chumash, and basically it was like I was able to, through my summaries, I was able to basically like I had like basically 1 or 2 lines per daf or per amud, and I was able to like go through Masechtas Eruvin. I think was the first Masechta I summarized, and I was able to basically chazer the entire Masechta in like 2 hours, right? It was like something that I've never been able to do something like that before. Honestly, I've never been able to chazer Masechta before, right? It was kind of a eye-opening experience for me. Where like, oh wow, if you actually like chazer something, you could actually know it and have it on your fingertips. And obviously, like within those 2 hours, I'm not remembering every single detail of every conversation, but it's like remembering the broad topics and knowing where things are, and by going through it and go like reviewing it and looking at my summaries and writing my summaries, I was able to have this kind of much more fingertip grasp of kind of where things are within the Masechta, and then ultimately where things are, at Seder Moed. And I guess that's a long way of saying, I basically created these summaries, and I thought, hey, I wanted to release them to the world. So I kind of created this website that I was able to kind of share the summaries with people. And then at some point while I was in college, I also worked on something called Beta Midrash, which is basically this an Android app using Safari's data to basically have this Torah app on the phone. And at that point, Safari, I worked with Safari. We basically sold Safari, and we ended up building, me and my roommate ended up building Safari's initial Android app. So that was kind of some of the, I guess, early things that I was doing in the Torah Tech. And, at some point I kind of, I guess at that point left college and spent more time focused on kind of a more typical, software profession, but definitely always been interested in kind of Torah Tech and kind of how I could try to use, technology to make Torah learning better in any way, right? Obviously, Torah is a huge, important pillar. So it's like, hey, let me try to improve it and make it a better space.
And now you're focusing on a really cool app that you built called the Torah App, which is an amazing app, not only because you can listen to Shark Tank on it, but for many other reasons as well. So maybe you can start with the origin story of that. Where did you get the idea from, and how did you start to build it?
Sure. So at some point, I guess maybe a little bit post-COVID, I started going back into the office and kind of was spending a lot of time on my commute. And instead of just listening to like news podcasts, I really wanted to like listen to Torah and Shirim. And there wasn't really a tool that gave me what I wanted to do. I wanted to like basically like binge listen to content from start to finish, just like I do with like a podcast, where I could just kind of listen to a ton of content and just go from start to end. And like I'm just sitting in the subway, I don't have to like research for an episode each time or whatever. And the internet's bad and it's all just, there and ready to go. So basically I ended up just like, for my own personal need, created these like podcast files, right? So I ended up creating like an entire series of like 10-minute halachos, where I was able to just listen to all the 10-minute halachos from YU Torah, like, kind of from start to finish, and just like go through that. I was able to pull up some content from OU Torah, and I was able to listen to Parsha things that I was able to go through. And, I wasn't, OU Torah has amazing tools for if you're learning Daf Yomi, but I wasn't learning Daf Yomi. I had my own Masechta that I wanted to learn, and I wanted to go from the beginning to the end of the Masechta and just kind of binge listen. And basically I created these podcast files. I thought they were cool. I mean, for myself personally, it was a game changer. I think it kind of enabled me to learn so much more than I had before. And honestly, it's kind of, I feel like I've been making up lost time in a way from by like how easy it is for me to learn Torah, where I'm just like, I'm commuting and I'm doing all these things, and I'm able to listen to this content, and I'm able to absorb so much more, between my wife and kids, and my wife's a doctor, so she's busy and full-time job. Like, it's hard for me to have like, a long, sit down Seder, but I have so much time where I'm able to, I'm on my commute, I'm washing dishes, whatever I'm doing, I'm able to listen to content. So I'm able to really absorb a ton of information just from kind of listening to audio content. So for me, it was a huge game changer. That being said, I didn't think that I was really shareable to others. I thought it was a little bit of a clunky process for others to kind of, download these podcast files or whatever it was. So it wasn't something that I shared. And then at some point, I guess that was one end of one end of the project. The other side of it, I was using the Safari app to kind of, whatever it was, I was learning my Gemara, and then I was, learning my Parsha. And throughout the week, I was kind of learning my different things at my Parsha, and then the Shulchan Aruch that I was looking to open up different things. And this Safari app just didn't quite do what I wanted to do. It didn't have like these multiple tabs. I kind of always had to like switch spots. So I was like, so one day I kind of like, I was learning Flutter, and, Flutter's like this programming tool to create apps. And I was like, hey, like, I just want to try to like see what happens if I play around, if I could build like a Safari-like app, like this text app, but has multiple tabs. So I basically sat down for a day and, kind of like a hackathon-like fashion, I kind of created this like, text-like app, and it had what I wanted. It had this multiple tab thing, and it basically allowed me to quickly jump between the different things that I was learning throughout the week. And, it made it much easier. And then at that point, I realized like, hey, I could put the podcast files, like this other Torah project that I was working on the side, this other like personal project. I could combine these two random personal fun projects and make it that the podcast files are these series, these bingeable series. I can make them much more accessible by making it accessible through the app, right? And at that point, I was like, hey, like this is actually really cool. Like, I could actually share this. At that point, obviously, I spent a little bit more time to kind of improve it and polish it and make it more useful. But ultimately, I basically created that combined app where it kind of takes the text and it takes the audio and it combines it. And actually, that combination is also really cool and useful, and it kind of enables people to kind of jump between the two mediums really quickly, right? You could be looking at some content you're opening up a text and you're like able to, you know, read through and look at the commentaries, but also you might say, hey, but I want to see what some modern person is actually saying about this. I want to listen to Shir or whatever, or vice versa, right? You could, by and large, be listening to the Shir, but actually, you actually just want to like open up for a little bit and read through the text and, look at the commentaries that are on it or whatever, right? So it allows you to bounce between them, which is really cool.
So if I understand correctly, if you're listening to Shark Tank and you hear a guest quote a Mishnah, so you'll be able to easily navigate to that Mishnah, or if you're learning that Mishnah and you're looking for some additional material on it and someone in Shark Tank mentioned it, that will also pop up automatically?
Yeah, so you can definitely always kind of open up different text. It depends on how interconnected it is, right? So, a Shir on Shark Tank might have a Mishnah quoted within it, right? The app won't necessarily know that like, oh, there was a one line that was a quote in there. But definitely, a Shir that's like the entire Shir is going through Mishnah Yomi, where it's kind of an obvious connection. It'll be much easier to just like, there's a button that's right there to open it. But even in one where it's like, a quote that's mentioned in passing, it's right there. It's not one button click, but yeah, it's a few button clicks in order to kind of open up the mission. And you could kind of look at it alongside and really kind of, make sure you're able to look into the sources and dive deeper and say, oh, wait, that Mishnah quoted this thing. And, there was that pasuk that I mentioned or whatever it is that you want to explore. You have kind of this entire, Torah universe open to you, right? It kind of creates this all-in-one app where we have the text and the audio content all kind of combined.
And maybe this is a bit of a controversial take, but it seems a little bit strange that some of these big organizations that you mentioned have developed apps for sharing Torah, and you found shortcomings with them and you're able to build an alternative just on your own. Do you find that puzzling at all, that these big organizations are building apps that don't necessarily work as well as they should or aren't that user-friendly, and you're able to just sit there on the side and hack something out?
I think it's not really surprising. I think in some level, some people might take the app that I have built and say, hey, this one's not user-friendly for me. They might not like the user experience that I've created, right? I think, the user experience works pretty well for myself, but honestly, I'm sure, I could get constructive criticism where someone could show me how to make the app better. Right. So I think, there's, and in some ways the apps are targeting different main use cases, right? I think, the main use case for the all DAP app is the DAF Yomi cycle. I don't think the main use case, although a secondary important use case is, if you want to learn different Masechta, right? And for Sefaria, I don't think their main user is someone who's switching between 7 different topics throughout the week or whatever, right? I think their main use case is the usability for the primary case, which is finding a single text, and that is, a smooth experience, right? And I think that's natural. I think there's also something to just like, hey, like, because I'm building my own thing, I'm able to build something where it's like, hey, if I want this, I could just tinker with it and mess with it and change it, right? It kind of, in some ways you could say like, I could be a proof of concept for other bigger places in that like I'm able to mess around with something and it's easier for me to make changes because, it's kind of lower stakes than some of these bigger organizations who already have an established, kind of user base or established process, right? I think that's always how these industries work, right? There's always someone who comes along and says, hey, we have some idea. And someone says, hey, like they can do something that's slightly different or, whatever it is. And that's, I guess going back to some of the innovation conversation we were talking about, right? Like, I think that's how innovation happens. Different products, quote unquote, startups come along and have a slightly different way of doing something. And if some of these big organizations think there was something of value add there, they could also implement it, on their side, or they say, what, that's for really a different type of user. So we don't want to use that. And that's also reasonable.
I'm wondering, you obviously have a lot of skills and experience and innovation and drive to put this together on your spare time. Is there a situation that we could see ourselves in the not too distant future that with advanced technologies, someone who doesn't have that same background, someone like me, could sit here and say, well, I'm not a techie, but there's this and this application that I would really find useful in my Torah learning, in my on-the-go Torah learning, based on the way that I learn and want to consume my content, that I will be able to put that together on my own without all the skills that you have?
I guess it depends on exactly what it is, right? If you talk about like the Torah summary website that I, kind of one of the first things that I was working on in college, honestly building, it was honestly relatively simple website. It was kind of just displaying content. It had to be a relatively lot of content, right? But it's just a quote unquote simple website. It was mostly just static content. For that kind of thing, yeah, I think honestly there's more AI tools available today that makes that kind of thing easier than it was 10 years ago. At some point you needed more skills in order to build a website. Now there's a lot more tools available, or someone who, you just want to create your own blog, or you want to just like upload your own content. There are AI tools out there where you kind of just like have it build a website for you, or kind of put a lot of the foundation there to build a website, and you kind of, rely on it to make small changes. And, obviously different people have different levels of techie, or different levels of being able to tinker things, or want to tinker with things. But I think depending on the type of product you're building, there are tools out there that can allow you to build things. If you want to build an app, I think, probably at this point, I don't think there's really great AI tools that'll build in kind of a whole app from start to finish, unless it's extremely simple app that's kind of mostly just a kind of a single type of display, right? Almost just like a flyer for something, right? Like almost you could imagine a website that's just kind of ultimately a flyer. So it really depends on kind of what ultimately you want to build. But definitely the world has been moving towards, there's more LLMs, there's more, AI tools to build things. And if you're creative enough, you could put together the puzzles and kind of create some pretty cool stuff by putting together puzzle pieces of these kind of AI tools.
But is there a chance that in the not too distant future, there will be some sort of ChatGPT where I'll explain to it, I want an app that will allow me to play my podcast in X, Y, and Z way, and it will build it for me?
Hard to know. I mean, ultimately, I think the world is moving in the direction where, these tools can build more and more better things and accomplish better tasks. It's hard to know how useful or how exactly that will turn out, right? It's, I guess I'm in the tech industry, so maybe I have a slightly better way of a different lens to try to predict that, but ultimately it's a prediction, right? It's really hard to know, right? Some predict that it's just like, yeah, it's just an assistive tool, right? So it's kind of just, around the edges, it'll make someone who's a software engineer 50% more effective. 50% more effective. It's huge, right? Let's imagine like saving half of an engineer, the cost of an engineer. But it still requires the software engineer to do the work, or no, really, you could just be like, I could describe ChatGPT what the app should do. Just like I'm going to write the description of the app in the app store, and it'll just create that entire app for me with ChatGPT. Maybe one day it will. I don't know, how impressive some of these tools will be over time, but it's definitely going to be interesting to see.
Got it. With regards to the app that you built, it sort of reminds me of a question that I've thought about a lot, which is the fact that companies like Google and all the big tech companies, they really helped increase this revolution of making everything so accessible, so easy, so clear, and seem to stand in a bit of tension with the concept that we learn about, Chazal in the beginning of Parshas Bechukosai, that there's a concept of Ameilus Torah, the Torah is supposed to be something you toil with, and it's supposed to be hard, and you're supposed to struggle. So how do you approach that dynamic?
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, if someone said, hey, you could take this pill, right? You could take this pill and it'll be easier to learn Torah, right? I would take that pill every time, right? That pill could be a cup of coffee, right? Or it could be, a Tylenol if you have a headache, right? Or it could be something more fancy, right? Why would I take the pill? Because you could learn the Torah and then you could spend that extra time to learn more Torah, right? I think a lot of times there's like this focus on like making sure to like work hard at Torah. And sometimes maybe we forget, or it's not as much of a focus of like, there's actually an obligation to absorb Torah, right? Like there's actually, we need to make sure to acquire a lot of Torah, right? Like there's halachic system that it's upon us to learn the halakha system and understand like halakha, and we have to actually absorb that information, right? There's a shir from a Schafter where he discusses like there's an obligation of all the males to try to over the lifetime try to learn Kol HaTorah Kula. Like people learn Kol HaTorah Kula. It's endless. It's like no, it's not endless. There's a finite definition of what's Kol HaTorah Kula, right? It's Tanakh, Mishnah, Talmud, Mishnah, Gemara, Tosefta, Shulchan Aruch, Rambam, right? There's a limited definition of what's Kol HaTorah Kula, and we should strive to actually try to learn it, right? If we can make our lives easier, if we make it easier to learn Torah, that is 100% a win, because there's more Torah to learn, right? And we should try to accomplish that goal. And I think honestly, like tools like the Torah app, like I said, for myself personally, I found it extremely eye-opening, extremely advantageous, right? I like I said, I'm making up for lost time, right? I'm able to kind of go through an entire Masechta, and then I'm able to listen to one share. I'm able to listen to Rabbi Leibowitz, who explains things really clearly. I love the way he explains things. And then I'm able to go back and do the exact same Masechta with the quick dot for Rabbi Reznik. And when I do it the second time, like I said, Chazar is amazing, right? Like all of a sudden it's like, wow, I have so much better understanding or grasp of that Masechta because I just did it twice in a row. And Rabbi Resnick does this quick daf in 15 minutes and you just do the math. It's not that long to like go through the whole Masechta a second time with going through with a different shiur. And like the tools that are available nowadays are so amazing. Right? You go to Torah App and like it has all the shiurim on any topic, right? At this point it has more shiurim than any other place, or you could find almost anything you want to learn. There's something that's available, right? And it's like, in a way, it's like there's no excuses anymore, right? The tools are so readily available. You don't have to, drive all the way to the next shtetl, or even to drive down the street to get access to some Maggid shiur. They're all sitting there in your fingertips, which means there's so much availability to learn as much as we need to and should be learning, right? There's all these. We have a responsibility to absorb all this information, and we could take that seriously. And like I said, the tech industry does things to try to be careful of how they're working on things and trying to make sure they're doing the correct thing and making the correct decisions. And it's like we should be mission driven, and we should be saying, okay, how can I try to accomplish this goal, and how could I learn all this Torah? And it's like I'm working on a feature in the Torah app where it's like, okay, you keep track of how much of the Torah you've learned, what things you've done, and what things you've hazard, and and all these different pieces of the tool. And honestly, I think it's a great thing to be able to have all these different shiurim. People might like one person's style, one people like the other shiur style, and they're all available to learn in the style that you like, that works best for you, and make Torah learning easier for you so that you can learn more Torah, right?
There's a concept in the tech world called gamification, which is you can take almost anything and make it into sort of a game with a PBL, points, badges, and levels. And I've also thought about that concept in the Torah context. Is that something we want to be doing, making the Torah into a game and making all these sticky things to have points and to share the badge that you've accomplished? Are you working on that in the Torah app? Do you have anything to say about that in your context?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, if it helps, then I think it's good. To me, I personally don't love the idea of like points and badges. To me, that feels a little bit too, it feels a little bit too much like you're kind of washing down the value of Torah. That being said, I think gamification in the broader sense of the term, where it's like people like to know, when you have a checklist, people like you do a task. People like the feeling of you checked off that task. It helps encourage you to do the next task, right? And it's and that's real, right? And we shouldn't be working against our psychology. We should be working with our psychology, right? So I think, if it's helpful to see that checkbox that you've accomplished the task, then we should create that checkbox so that it's easier to see it, and not just so that you could see it because it's out there. It's like it's important to know what you've learned because we have a responsibility to learn a large amount of content. So therefore, we should be careful about knowing what we've accomplished already, so that we have a system, or what the system might be. I'm kazaring it in this order, or the system might be that I'm going through it and this is what I've already done, or whatever it is. I'm currently, like I think kind of mentioned, I'm working on kind of a feature of like kind of keeping track of what you've done. I think it's maybe like a personal type of gamification in a way where it's like, okay, you know that you've accomplished it, you're able to check it off. It's not quite a badging and point system, but I think it is. I think it does kind of flow with it goes together with, instead of against our psychology of trying to be like, yeah, this it feels empowering that I've accomplished this much, and it's like, okay, now like I could accomplish the next parsha, I could accomplish the next stop, or whatever it is.
Okay, so as we wrap up, maybe you can give one pitch for all our listeners who are listening to us, why they should go ahead to download the Torah app right now and how they can do so.
Sure. So the Torah app, you could find it on kind of the both the app stores, Android and iOS, where it's just the word Torah app, no spaces. Or you could go to the internet. You can use it on your desktop at thetorahapp.org. And there it's, kind of, you have a wider screen, but, it's kind of effectively the same product. Honestly, I think there's three main things the Torah app does that makes it, makes it so valuable. I think effectively there's the text reader, the podcast or the shiurim, and combination of them, right? In terms of the text reader, it has the multiple tabs or other things that I personally like in terms of the UI. And it also actually, I worked with, it takes the content from Sefaria, but, Sefaria has 99% of it is pure gold. It's amazing content. But their philosophy isn't strictly Orthodox. They have some non-Orthodox content. So I worked with Rabbi Gil student, and we basically kind of made what I would call like a glot kosher version of the Sefaria app. So for those that want to make sure that they have Orthodox only translation and content, right? You could use the Torah app as making sure that you're getting kind of a good kosher content only. Also, in terms of the podcast, right? You have the shirim. You on that side of things, it has more shirim than any other place, right? Thankfully, because I don't need to pay someone to build a product. I build the product myself. I don't need donations. I don't need to kind of fund this from external sources. So I'm able to kind of gather shirim from all over the places, and I'm happy to say, like, if you like the shirim, go donate to the original owner of the shir, right? So from that, like, Torp has created this kind of the biggest library of shirim that exists in an app, and it also allows this kind of, like I said, kind of this bingeable, you go open up Sefer Yeshua and go from Parag 1 to the end and listen from start to finish. I mean, it really gives you this kind of ability to really kind of go through Torah, using shirim and with a wide sea of what's available. And lastly, it's just the combination of the two. I think there's something very powerful about combining this kind of the traditional texts with basically our generation's new medium, right? I think it's a new thing that we're actually putting Torah into shirim, and we're kind of preserving Torah in this new way. And I think generations in the future are going to look back on it and actually use this new medium. And it's a serious medium. It's not just like, oh, it's our own take of things and it's a temporary thing. It's not a temporary thing. People are going to be looking back and using this content. And I think we're effectively organizing the world's shirim and the world's content to be able to access it. And you're able to switch seamlessly between those two different mediums. It's very, it makes it much easier to find the content and makes it much easier to kind of learn whichever way you want to learn. If you currently want to use the text, or you currently want to use the shirim, or, what's best is if you could do both at the same time and you're following along, right? Or whatever it is, right? So I think it's, really that combination of the text app, the shirim that are available, and that combination of all of them, I think, makes the Torah app kind of a uniquely valuable tool that I'm hoping could help spread Torah.
Well, I'm happy to hear that future generations will be hopefully listening to Shark Tank in the year 2050 and 60 and 70. But just to clarify one point that sounded very interesting, and I just want to understand this better. How is it possible that you have the biggest shirim library in the world? Just A, how you built that, and B, is there a way that you verified that claim to be true?
Sure. So for the most part, it's basically I've combined, like, I've gotten permission from YU Torah and OU Torah. Together, they're a ginormous library. And I've also have a number of podcasts out there. So combining all of them makes it, obviously by the nature, makes it bigger than YU, makes it bigger than OU. It's bigger than, I think, Torah, it's definitely bigger than Torah Anytime. I think Torah Anytime's in roughly a 200,000 shirim, range, or maybe 300,000. The combination of shirim in Torah app, I think, is roughly like 800,000 to 900,000 shirim. Is it possible that if you opened up Apple or YouTube, you might find more? It's possible. I'm not sure if you would define, if you use all the content in YouTube, if you added it up, whether or not it'll add up to more. My guess is not. My guess is the combination of YU Torah and OU Torah supersedes that. There's actually some Torah Anytime content within the app, but definitely if you define the definition as a Torah app or a Torah focused app, and you kind of don't include something like YouTube, which I'm honestly not sure if it has more content, but if it does, it kind of obviously is a very different type of product where you're opening the door to a much further, much more dangerous library of content that I'm not sure that definition would fit. But I'm pretty confident of that claim, but I can't say 100% certainty based on that there isn't if you wouldn't say all podcast players added together, or all YouTube videos added together won't outpace it.
Okay, I once heard a cool description of how the Guinness World Records adjudicates its record claims, and we won't go there just yet for the Torah app, but maybe at some point we will do that. Josh, I really enjoy what you're doing, and I think it's really cool that someone like you, a Ben Torah, who has all these skills in the software world, use them to make the Torah world a better place. So thank you for that, and thank you for coming on to talk about it today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. That's our show for today. If you enjoy Shark Tank, you will also enjoy our quiet WhatsApp group, where we send episode updates, bonus content, and more. Over hundreds of listeners have already joined. The link is in the show notes.